My name is Aryan and my infographic is about Bitcoin. The visual potential of appearance communicates the topic of a display by using a recognizable graphic element or by using a viewer's prior understanding of a topic and visualizing it. I've used an iteration of the Bitcoin logo's B. I've used color to the use of contrast by making the Bitcoin's B have a blue infill and stand out from its red background. This helps those familiar with Bitcoin and its symbol to quickly identify the display as being related to Bitcoin, and those unfamiliar with Bitcoin to appreciate that Bitcoin is related to the B in some way. Furthermore, my appearance display reinforces the idea that Bitcoin is related to computers and technology in some way by overlaying the B on a computer circuit, which has the added benefit of associating Bitcoin with something digital akin a digital currency. The rest of the background acts as and looks like a stamp of approval, which conveys the idea that Bitcoin is large scale and important. Visual potential of number communicates the number, amount, or size of something visually and tries to answer how many or how much of something there is. Whereas the visual potential of time tries to communicate when events have happened in time relative to each other. I've exploited the visual potential of numbers through using height-based encoding on a logarithmic-based line graph, where the y-axis represents the value of Bitcoin relative to the US dollar. This numbers display uses time-based encoding based on position to the x-axis, where moving clockwise along the circle represents moving further in time. The height of a graph at a given point communicates Bitcoin's value at the x-axis date to a y-axis value. I will discuss the use of labels when I discuss the type model, but for now, I wanted to address that the numbers display uses identity labels that correspond to events in the time display. I've used visual encoding for using similar icons or numbers to reinforce this, that certain events in the numbers display correspond to certain events in the events or time display. The time display exploits the visual potential of time by showing major political, economic, and media-driven events that have affected Bitcoin, and when used in conjunction with the numbers display, showed how they've affected its value and can help viewers associate certain price spikes or crashes with events in time. Similar to the numbers display, the time display encodes the passage of time through position. The further down you read through the time display, the further you're moving in time. I foresee certain complaints to be made against the way I have encoded my time and numbers display, and I would like to address them as well as state different ways in which I have tried to resolve them. For the numbers display, events are not equidistant from each other within the time display by themselves. So for instance, an event in 2009 will be just as far away as two events that have happened simultaneously in 2010, for instance. To address this, however, I have used identifying icons for each of the events in the time display and overlaid them on the numbers display where they are proportionately further away from each other dependent on when they occurred in time. As for the numbers display, I see two complaints in the way I have encoded it. The first one being that around the first way being for the first complaint stems from the fact that I have encoded the numbers display around a circle, which makes comparing different price milestones across time difficult. To address this, I have used grid axes along the y-axis for price to help viewers keep track of different of fluctuations in Bitcoin's price along time for the numbers display. Second complaint I foresee people making against the way I have encoded my numbers display is in the use of logarithmic scale. A logarithmic scale isn't traditionally seen within media, so it's not really intuitive for people to understand. That said, since Bitcoin's inception in 2010, it has fluctuated from a few cents to almost $20,000. And for much of its life, Bitcoin has in fact remained under $1,000, and it's only in the last 2 years that we have seen it ascend $1,000. Various events before that, which have perhaps caused its price to fluctuate from $10 to $100, which is a hundredfold difference, aren't visually explicitly conveyed in the use of a traditional linear scale. A logarithmic display fixes this. To illustrate this point, the graph below, the lowest graph, uses a logarithmic display, and the graph subsequently above it uses a traditional linear display. However, to further help with this, I have encoded in whenever Bitcoin has reached a price milestone, let's say it reached its first exchange rate for one Bitcoin equals $1, $10, $100. I have encoded that within a read and its corresponding value within the numbers display itself. The reads increase in complexity as the milestones increase in value, and this can be thought of as a precision label, which helps viewers visually interpret when Bitcoin reached certain price milestones. Relationships have the visual potential to communicate connections between things or people in the real world using connections through shapes or icons or text, and they can help show how different things are connected or associated with each other. For my relationship display, I have opted to show visually how bitcoins are generated and sent within the blockchain network. To do so, I have elements that are formed through the use of an icon and some text, linked to each other using arrows from when someone decides they want to send someone else bitcoins to when the bitcoins are actually transferred. I've used color to encode activities that are carried out by the same entity. So for instance, the user group is through a light red, miners are through blue, and the full nodes, the activities that are carried out by full nodes, are visually illustrated through the use of dark red icons. To further help illustrate that these are different groups, I have used bins in the form of dotted lines that visually help group together certain sets of people, as well as describe who they are and what they do. I've used arrows to encode the flow of steps from one action to the next. And I believe my display is intuitive to understand because people read inherently from left to right. Visual potential of location shows you where something is relative to each other and can be exploited to show how different regions differ from each other through using shapes corresponding to countries and regions that viewers may be inherently familiar with. I've used location through the use of a world map to visually communicate the volume of Bitcoin traded by a country's currency adjusted to its population. I've done so through using color to encode this information, with darker regions having more and lighter regions having lesser trade. I've chosen blue for this display because it's less harsh on the eyes, it's easier on the eyes by being a cool color, as well as contrasts strongly with the surrounding red in the numbers display that encompasses this information to be visually striking to the viewer and immediately grab their attention. A disadvantage of this form of display, however, is that there are no labels, as well as information is abstracted away by being color-coded to only certain levels. So for instance, people may not know where Turkey is, and they'll have to pull up a phone and see where it is on their phone, and then cross-reference that with my map and see the value Turkey holds. However, my reason for not including labels is based on my preliminary critiques. My classmates found that the displays without country labels, or for that matter, any labels, were much cleaner, and they preferred those displays to the displays with labels. As for abstracting away information behind using only certain levels of colors, I've tried to navigate this by choosing levels that, while logarithmic in scale, do highlight the larger trends that we see within this relationship display. That is that North America and most of Europe have more trades, and certain countries like certain continents like Africa and parts of South Asia have fewer trades. The color model I'm trying to emulate is to the left of this page and labeled Defying Gravity. I've emulated this within my own infographic by using the same white background, as well as equal amounts of red and blue throughout the infographic, as well as having all text be black, just like Defying Gravity does. Defying Gravity also uses color to compartmentalize and separate certain displays to each other, which I've emulated within my own infographic by using predominantly red to encode the numbers display and blue to encode the location display. Defying Gravity uses color to highlight certain attributes such as rivers in the bottom half of the infographic in contrast to a light red map. I have emulated this within my own infographic by using milestones and identifying time stamps, time labels, which are a light blue in comparison to the strong red background in the numbers display. This makes them pop out more, just like Defying Gravity does so. Defying Gravity uses color to encode information. It uses it to represent extremes in the top half map, as well as encode a hot and dry feeling, representative and reminding us of a hot desert. I have emulated the use of extremes within my own map in my infographic by opting for darker colors to represent more, and lighter colors to represent less. My infographic, however, detracts from my color model here, which uses a divergent color scheme. I did so because my infographic that I'm trying to emulate uses a divergent color scheme because it has categorical data, but since I have numerical data which isn't centered on 0, I've used a I've used a linear color model. I've used a linear increasing darkness of blue because it is a non-divergent form of information, and a divergent color scheme confused viewers when I interviewed them for gathering feedback about my infographic. Defying Gravity uses color to trigger associations between sand, heat, and sunlight, which are hot colors or shades of red, so they feel appropriate for the use of Defying Gravity's infographic. I'm trying to trigger an association between seriousness as well as Bitcoin, which uses a shade of red towards its own infographic. The use of warm and cool colors within Defying Gravity sets a serious tone. It sets a tone of urgency. I've tried to emulate that within my own infographic by using red and blue to draw the same sense of urgency and seriousness. There are some drawbacks with my use of the color model, the first one being that it doesn't necessarily fit the topic I have chosen because blue and red isn't inherently what I would associate with a cryptocurrency. My reason for doing so, however, was more so personal to stretch my own bounds of imagination and thinking by being forced to use a color model which I had never done so before. The second drawback is within the use of color. Although I have emulated the same use of red and blue, I have not emulated the same use of shades of red and blue. My infographic uses a lot more darker shades of red, whereas my color model, Defying Gravity, uses lighter shades of red. I did so because when I was developing my infographic, having the numbers display use lighter shades of red prevented it from contrasting strongly enough with the milestones and information within it, as well as having a darker shade of blue for the location display helped me better visualize the differences in levels for different prices, which I wasn't able to do so if I just opted for the lighter shades of blue. I wouldn't be able to draw the same differences between countries. The last drawback, or where I diverge from my color model, is through the use of other models. My visual language model dictates I have a lot more text, and my typography model dictates the text be strong and big. My color model uses a lot less text, which as a result has a lot less black within the infographic itself, whereas my infographic gives a feeling of a lot more black being present as a result of having more text, which is an unintended side effect of following through with the other models I have chosen to develop my infographic around. Defying Gravity uses a complementary color palette to the use of red and blue, which are found on the opposite ends of the color spectrum for a color wheel. and I have emulated that same complementary color tone throughout my infographic. Text model I'm emulating is the Ohio River infographic. It uses sans fonts in the form of text to black for headings and subheadings, and core sans regular for the body. I've emulated this within my own infographic. It's not a one-to-one fit, as can be seen with the numbers. The zeros are more spherical in Ohio River, but they are more elliptical within for text to black and core sans regular. Precision labels tell the viewer the precise numerical value that is represented by a graphical element, and they are used within the Ohio River infographic at the tail end of bar graphs. I've emulated this within my own infographic. The value taken up by certain cryptocurrencies are represented at the tail end of a bar graph. Identity labels clarify what elements represent, and the Ohio River infographic does so by having identity labels next to certain dams. I have emulated this within my time display where I have identity labels next to certain events. Annotations add information about a graphic element that is not conveyed by the graphic itself, and it is used within the Ohio River infographic on the bottom right. I have emulated this within my own infographic, where I annotate certain elements within my time display and relationship display by illustrating what the graphical element represents. For association, I have used leader lines in the case of countries, where I have a line going through the country towards its corresponding text and date when the country made it illegal, as well as proximity in my relationship display, where I have graphical elements and their corresponding text being close together to illustrate that they are in fact a part of a single element. My text model doesn't use any right-aligned text, but it does use center and left-aligned text. The reason I have chosen to use a little bit of right-aligned text in the display next to my time display, that is where countries have made Bitcoin legal, is because my visual language model presents information in a certain way, and the only way which I could think about to emulate that is to use right-aligned text. This visual language model follows that of the future of Bitcoin. This infographic has an abstract style with high details and icons where present. The use of elements and text has a flat appearance, and this visual language model uses a lot of circles. I've emulated the abstract style with high details within my interpretation of the Bitcoin logo, as can be seen on the bottom right of the screen. My visual language model has icons follow a similar structure and look in that they are all sharing the same color. I could not recreate this entirely within most of my displays because my color model dictates that I balance the use of red and blue, which requires me to use different colors. However, I have balanced this out in the display to the top left of my numbers display, where I compare the different values of cryptocurrencies. Over here, all the logos follow the same color structure, which is representative of my visual language model. Furthermore, my visual language model has a white border around certain elements. I have emulated this within my location display, which has a white border around all the countries. My visual language model does not have a map, but I have recreated one in my interpretation of what I believe a map would look like if it were present in my visual language model, in that it would be devoid of labels, it would be minimalistic, and it would be flat in that there would be no terrain or texture in any of the countries. My visual language model does have numbers data around a circle, and I've emulated that in my visual hierarchy through the use of color, size, and position influence how viewers move about and perceive information within an infographic. Albeit viewers look at the central display first, as a result of the high contrast red, and blue, as well as the large scale of the numbers and location display, I believe that instead of interpreting the information there, their eyes will move towards the large text that says Bitcoin on the bottom right of the screen, because they will want to look at the largest text because that usually is associated with what the topic is about. After reading that, they will go back to what drew their attention in, and they will look at the title first because that is the title for the topic for the display first, since that is the largest font for the corresponding display. They will look at the location display first. After that, move out towards the numbers display because that is what caught their eyes second. Following that, as they move clockwise around the numbers display, they will notice small numbers that are embedded within blue circles. And they will notice that these are similar to those on the time display, and they will associate that these two are correlated in some way, and they will bounce back and forth between the time and numbers display as they try and make sense of why certain events have caused Bitcoin's price to crash and fall. So after they move from inside the circle to outside the circle, and then from left to right, as humans intuitively read, they will move from top to bottom and perceive the relationship display on the bottom, where they will read the relationship display from left to right, since that is the most intuitive way in which humans perceive information, as well as the hierarchy is further communicated by the use of arrowheads, which show the direction of information flow within the relationship display. I have created unity and variety within my infographic through emulating certain attributes of my displays after those found in my visual language and color models. My visual language model has different elements separated by white space. I've emulated this within my own infographic, where the title, which can be seen as a connecting joint between my relationship and time display, is separated from both of them through a use of white space that is larger than those found within the elements for the corresponding displays themselves, which helps a viewer interpret this disjointness as a sign that a corresponding display has ended and a new display as beginning. Through the use of my color model, I have grouped together certain elements under the same color scheme. So for instance, the location display is predominantly blue and the numbers display predominantly red. Within these elements, if there is variations of color, such as with the numbers display, proximity has been used to illustrate that an element is a part of the corresponding display. So for instance, the price milestones are blue, and they are contained, however, they are completely encompassed within the numbers display. And as such, viewers can associate that it is a part of the numbers display and not location display. My layout model is text minimal and has a lot of circular displays with a strong top and bottom horizontal axis to the use of rectangular displays. Viewer attention is immediately drawn in to the strong circular middle display, and my own infographic is modeled after that. It emulates a strong circular display, which encompasses location and number information. My infographic also emulates the strong horizontal display on the bottom through the use of my relationship display, as can be seen with the overlaid blue boxes. I've tried to emulate the vertical and horizontal space taken up by the circles on the right of on the largest circle on my layout model, and this can be seen through the use of the overlaid yellow boxes on both the models. It should be noted I am unable to follow my layout model exactly because my layout model uses a lot of circles and has a lot more displays to take up more space, whereas my infographic only has 7 displays within them, and most of them are boxes in nature, which limits how I can arrange them in a way to emulate the circles from my layout model. Furthermore, my layout model uses displays that build off each other and are instinctively similar, and which enables them to overlap each other since they present the same or complementary information. For instance, the circles convey information about trains, and this enables them, for instance, the bar graphs on the circumference of a circle to overlap the circumference of another circle. My own infographic doesn't have the same privilege, since although it is all about Bitcoin, the nature of the information represented by displays are different within my own infographic.